There is a difference between kindness and pleasing. One comes from strength, the other from fear. Too many people confuse being nice with being wise, grounded, and respectful. But often, behind that need to be agreeable is a quiet sense of insecurity. The fear of rejection, the fear of conflict, the fear of not being liked. In trying to please everyone, you end up losing yourself. Your time, your energy, your values, they are traded for temporary approval. This is not compassion, this is self-abandonment. True presence does not require you to shrink. A centered life requires boundaries. And the more you delay them, the more your life will reflect other people's expectations instead of your truth. It is time to shift from being too nice to being clear, strong, and awake. Kindness without clarity becomes weakness, and strength without boundaries becomes exhaustion. The nature of one's behavior is not always reflected by its surface. To the outside world, being nice is often seen as a virtue, a sign of humility, a sign of goodness, a sign of harmony. But this is only the visible layer. The hidden layer is where the truth resides. And very often, when someone is excessively nice, when they constantly agree, avoid confrontation, always say yes, always smile, always yield, it is not arising from deep wisdom or compassion. It is arising from fear. Fear of not being accepted. Fear of not being liked. Fear of creating tension. Fear of losing connection. The behavior is soft, but the root is anxious. And when the root is fear, the fruit cannot nourish your life. If you live your life trying to avoid upsetting others, you place yourself in a cage. That cage may be made of politeness, but it is still confinement. Every time you silence your truth to preserve harmony, every time you ignore your boundaries so others remain comfortable, you are creating a small fracture within yourself. And if repeated daily, those fractures become wounds. You may not see them at first, but slowly they begin to show in resentment, in fatigue, in feeling unseen, in the quiet realization that your life does not belong to you, but to the expectations of others. This is what happens when niceness is used as a mask to hide from fear. A person rooted in true kindness is not afraid of being misunderstood. They speak with clarity, they act with awareness, they are willing to cause short-term discomfort for the sake of long-term honesty, because they understand that real connection cannot grow from pretense. It grows from authenticity, from boundaries, from truth, but a person who is too nice avoids all discomfort. They avoid rejection by avoiding their own truth. They abandon their own needs to maintain a fragile image of being agreeable. And in doing so, they pay a high price. Their peace, their time, their inner strength. Fear, disguised as kindness, becomes self-sacrifice with no purpose. Examine this deeply. Ask yourself, why do you always say yes, even when you mean no? Why do you agree out loud while disagreeing in silence? Why do you carry burdens that were never yours to carry? If the answer is fear, fear of conflict, fear of being disliked, fear of being alone, then your niceness is not compassion, it is conditioning, perhaps from childhood, perhaps from society. But it is not your highest self, it is your survival self. And as long as you let fear lead your behavior, you will remain a prisoner of that fear. Real growth begins when you stop mistaking fear for virtue, when you stop giving your power away in the name of being liked, when you start to realize that your value is not tied to how little space you take, how easy you are to tolerate, or how silent you remain in the face of discomfort. There is a kindness that comes from alignment, and there is a niceness that comes from fear. One liberates, the other traps. The path of mastery is not about being hard, it is about being real. It is about seeing clearly the subtle patterns that run your life, and choosing differently. You are not here to live small so others feel comfortable. You are not here to trade your presence for approval. Being nice is only meaningful when it comes from choice, not from fear. When you are strong enough to say no without guilt, when you are grounded enough to disagree with calmness, when you are present enough to face rejection without collapsing, that is when your kindness becomes authentic. Not everyone will understand, not everyone will approve, but those who value truth will recognize something deeper in you. Not just a nice person, but a person of integrity, of presence, of strength. There is a subtle but powerful form of suffering that many people carry without speaking of it. It is not always visible in their actions, yet it lives in their thoughts, in their tension, in their quiet frustration with themselves. It is the habit of pleasing others at the cost of their own truth. On the outside, it looks harmless, even generous. You show up for others, you agree when asked, you adjust your preferences to avoid tension, you carry the load so others feel light. You listen, nod, support, stay silent. You become the reliable one, the easy one, the one who never causes waves. But inside, something very important is being neglected. And over time, that neglect becomes self-betrayal. Self-betrayal does not happen all at once. It is a gradual erosion, a small yes here when you meant no, a conversation you endured when your body wanted space, a responsibility accepted not because it aligned with your values, but because you feared disappointing someone. Each of these moments, taken alone, may seem insignificant, but collectively they send a message to your inner self. Your truth is not as important as their comfort. And if this message is repeated over weeks, months, years, it becomes part of your identity. You no longer recognize your needs, your opinions, your limits. They have been buried beneath the habit of pleasing. When you live in this way, even your positive actions lose their meaning. A yes is not a true yes if it comes from pressure. Support is not pure when it comes from fear of disconnection. What looks like care becomes a performance, a role you play to maintain peace on the outside while turmoil grows within. And because this betrayal is often invisible to others, there is no validation for it. No one sees the weight you carry when you say yes while screaming no inside. No one sees the moments when you give but feel empty. People may even praise you for being so kind, so helpful, so understanding, without knowing how deeply you are sacrificing your authenticity. The pain of people-pleasing is that it creates distance between your outer life and your inner truth. You appear present, but you feel absent. You appear aligned, but you feel hollow. And this gap creates confusion. You wonder why you feel tired. You wonder why you feel disconnected from your own life. You wonder why resentment grows toward those you serve. But the resentment is not toward them. It is toward the part of yourself that you keep silencing. But stop betraying yourself does not mean you become selfish. It means you include yourself in the space where your compassion operates. You do not stop caring for others. You simply stop excluding your own voice in the process. You begin to ask, does this action align with me? Am I doing this from fear or from choice? Do I still respect myself after this yes? These questions are not signs of rebellion. They are signs of returning to yourself, of remembering that your well-being matters just as much as the well-being of others. You are not responsible for how others feel about your truth. You are only responsible for honoring it. And when you begin to live in this way, with presence, with honesty, with respect for your inner world, you no longer need to please everyone. You simply need to be real. Some will understand, some will not. But the more you stop betraying yourself, the more your life will attract those who do not need you to shrink in order to love you. There is a quiet misunderstanding that causes many people to suffer in silence. It is the belief that setting boundaries is a form of separation, that to say no is to reject, that to protect your energy is to be selfish, that to express your limits is to build walls. But this misunderstanding arises only when love is confused with self-abandonment. Love in its true form is not weakened by boundaries, it is purified through them. Because love without boundaries turns into obligation, into exhaustion, into something that is constantly being given but rarely received with depth. Boundaries are not a rejection of others. They are an affirmation of your own value, your space, your needs. And without them, what you offer others is no longer a gift. It becomes a depletion. When people do not respect your boundaries, it is often because you have not respected them yourself. You teach others through your actions. If you continually allow your time to be interrupted, your energy to be drained, your silence to be invaded, others will unconsciously believe that this is acceptable. But when you begin to honor the framework of your own well-being, something changes. You no longer act from guilt, you act from clarity. You no longer say yes from fear, you say no from alignment. And this change may unsettle some people who were comfortable with your lack of boundaries, but it will also attract those who respect the strength it takes to live in integrity. Boundaries are not walls you build to keep others out. They are lines you draw to keep yourself rooted. They are the lines that separate self-care from self-neglect, presence from performance, love from dependency. When you learn to say, "This is what I need, this is what I cannot accept, this is how I must be treated," you are not pushing people away. You are inviting them into a clearer relationship with who you truly are. You are making it possible for love to exist without confusion, without resentment, without hidden expectations. Many people fear setting boundaries because they associate it with conflict. But the deeper truth is that boundaries reduce conflict. They create structure where there was once chaos. They bring clarity where there was once assumption. They make the unspoken spoken. And when something is spoken, it can be honored, adjusted, or understood. But when boundaries are hidden, they are crossed again and again. And every crossing leaves behind frustration, bitterness, and emotional fatigue. You do not owe anyone unlimited access to you, not your time, not your mind, not your presence. Access is a privilege, and privileges must be earned and maintained through mutual respect. When you give without measure, when you bend without end, when you stretch yourself thin to meet the needs of others while ignoring your own, you will not feel more connected. You will feel more distant from yourself, and slowly the distance between who you are and how you live will grow. That is not peace. That is disconnection. Boundaries allow you to be generous without being depleted, to be compassionate without being used, to be present without being consumed. When you learn to express your boundaries calmly, without anger, without aggression, but with firmness and grace, you become a stable force in your own life. You are no longer trying to control others. You are simply choosing to control the space in which your energy operates. That is not a loss of love. That is the foundation of it. Because real love, whether with others or within yourself, cannot thrive in confusion. It needs honesty. It needs space. It needs the courage to say, "This is who I am, this is what I can give, and this is what I need in return." The world does not respond only to what you say, it responds to what you embody. Your energy, your habits, your posture, your consistency, these communicate silently but powerfully. And one of the deepest truths that often escapes our awareness is this: the way you treat yourself creates a blueprint for how others will treat you. It is not enough to demand respect with words while you disregard yourself in action. It is not enough to ask for space if you never give yourself permission to rest. You cannot expect others to value you while you devalue your own time, your own energy, your own boundaries. Life is not listening to what you wish for, it is responding to what you practice. If you consistently put yourself last, people will assume that is where you belong. If you tolerate disrespect internally through negative self-talk, self-criticism, or burnout, others will sense that there is no strong boundary protecting your dignity. You may try to compensate for this by being overly agreeable, by avoiding tension, by trying to appear humble or selfless. But self-neglect is not humility. It is an invitation to be overlooked. The way you hold yourself, even in solitude, matters. If your words are kind to others, but harsh to yourself, there is imbalance. If your time is freely given to all, but never protected for your own renewal, there is no center. And without a center, your presence begins to lose weight. To change how others treat you, you must begin by observing the patterns of how you treat yourself. Every morning, do you wake with intention or with avoidance? Do you nourish your body or only push it harder? Do you speak to yourself with patience or with pressure? These are not soft questions. They are fundamental, because self-respect is not built in public. It is built in the silent rituals of how you show up for yourself when no one is watching. A person who carries self-respect does not need to demand it from others. It is evident in how they walk, how they breathe, how they respond. People feel it without explanation. There is a natural authority in someone who values themselves without arrogance. When you begin to treat yourself as sacred, not in ego, but in awareness, something shifts in the dynamic with others. You no longer chase validation. You no longer beg for attention. You no longer accept the crumbs of connection or tolerate disrespect disguised as care. Instead, you operate from an inner clarity. You no longer react to how others treat you. You guide it silently through your own example. And if someone does not align with your standard, you do not need to convince them. You simply move differently. This is not coldness. It is wisdom. A tree does not beg the wind to respect its roots. It grows strong enough to remain upright no matter how the wind moves. This type of discipline is not easy. It requires a commitment to yourself that is consistent. Even when it is inconvenient, even when no one applauds it, it means doing what is necessary to remain in integrity, saying no when it is difficult, resting when the world tells you to push harder, walking away when the energy around you becomes harmful. These are acts of self-training, and just like in martial arts, where every repetition builds not only skill, but mindset. The repeated acts of treating yourself well create a new standard. That standard becomes your invisible shield. It repels what does not serve you and attracts what aligns. Others may not always know your history, your boundaries, your values, but they will always feel how you carry yourself, and that feeling, that quiet resonance of dignity, will teach them everything they need to know. You do not need to explain your worth, you only need to embody it. And when you do, the world will begin to mirror that respect back to you in ways that are unmistakable. There is a quiet danger in the confusion between two very different energies, kindness and weakness. In the modern world, where appearances often carry more weight than essence, many individuals fall into the trap of believing that to be kind, they must also become passive, overly agreeable, and easy to tolerate. But this confusion robs kindness of its strength. True kindness is not born from the absence of power. It is born from the mastery of it. A kind person is not kind because they have no edge. They are kind because they have chosen, consciously, not to use the edge they have against others. They are kind not because they cannot fight, but because they do not need to prove themselves through conflict. And that difference changes everything. A powerless person is often kind out of fear, fear of rejection, fear of judgment, fear of creating discomfort. Their kindness is transactional. It becomes a strategy to keep peace, to gain favor, to avoid being hurt. But underneath that softness is insecurity. And when kindness is built on insecurity, it loses authenticity. It becomes a mask worn so often that even the wearer begins to believe it is their true nature. But if you listen closely, you can hear the fatigue behind the smile. You can feel the anxiety behind the agreement. And in that silence, the truth reveals itself. This is not compassion. This is survival. In contrast, someone who is rooted in their inner strength does not fear expressing kindness. They know who they are. They are not worried about being perceived as weak because they do not derive their identity from others' perceptions. Their kindness does not come from lack. It comes from overflow. They are kind because they have cultivated discipline, clarity, and peace within themselves. And from that inner abundance, they give freely, but not endlessly, generously, but not blindly. They do not tolerate disrespect in the name of patience. They do not stay quiet in the name of peace. They understand that kindness without limits is not virtue. It is abandonment of self. The path of true mastery, whether in the temple, in the world, or in the mind, teaches that strength and softness are not enemies. They are partners, like the yin and the yang. You must know when to speak and when to remain silent, when to open and when to walk away, when to give and when to protect what remains. A powerful person is not constantly proving their strength. Their silence is strength. Their presence is strength. Their refusal to be reactive is strength. And when that strength expresses itself through kindness, it becomes rare and unforgettable. People can feel it. They respect it. Because it is not performance. It is alignment. To be kind is to live with intention, to recognize the humanity in others while still honoring your own. It is not to shrink. It is not to bend beyond your shape. It is to choose love over dominance, clarity over noise, calm over chaos. And these choices cannot be made consistently by someone who is empty. They can only be made by someone who has met themselves, who has sat in silence, who has walked through discomfort without collapsing, who has failed without bitterness and risen without arrogance. These are the foundations of real strength. And from these foundations, kindness flows without fear. So the next time you feel the urge to apologize for your kindness, remember this: your softness does not weaken you. It reveals your control, your capacity to hold power without abusing it, your ability to see clearly and still choose the path of compassion, not because you have to, but because you can. That is not weakness, that is self-mastery. In a world that often mistakes silence for surrender and kindness for weakness, remember, your value is not in how much you endure, but in how deeply you honor your truth. The journey is not to become cold, but to become clear. Not to reject others, but to no longer reject yourself. When you stop being too nice at the cost of your boundaries, you begin to live not from fear, but from awareness. And from that awareness you no longer seek power. You become it. Walk your path with strength. Speak your truth with calm. And let your presence carry quiet authority.